Okay, so it's Friday, August 12th, and today I want to do something a little bit different. I always go through like the day's events and I focus on a particular item, whatever is salient in the news. Today I just want to give you all the news pieces as kind of a snapshot of here's let's take the temperature of what's going on in Ukraine. Let's just look at a snapshot of what's going on and see how they're doing. And today is actually a brilliant day for all that because the things are just so scattered. So let's go on and do that. There's shelling into nets. The fighting is still pretty significant there. In fact, one article was talking about how forces bombed Sumy region 200 times in one day. Like Sumy, if you don't know where Sumy is, Sumy's up here, bordering Russia. Here is Sumy, Kharkiv. Luhansk is pretty much controlled by the Russians. Donetsk, they're trying to control it. Zaporizhia and Kherson are also under control, and Crimea has been under Russian control since 2014. So it's a little odd that they're doing as much as they're doing in Sumy. That's kind of an extension. So that's what was going on here in a number of different, not like one particular town, but in different towns or different areas. After 1 o'clock, this village 60 strikes, another village with 40 strikes, another village after 6:30, and the article goes on and talks about all the different articles, or all the different bombing within that region. Okay, Kremlin is reportedly attempting to mobilize industry to support prolonged war efforts in Ukraine. Now, this is according to the ISW, which I take as a fairly authoritative source. They don't make stuff up, and they make sure they verify things. They're going to put another $10 billion into the war effort, so they're looking long term. That's another thing that you want to factor in. Russian forces conducted ground attacks in the east, and they conducted other ground attacks in the east, and we just talked about the missiles. Okay, let's keep moving on. Visa restrictions for Russian citizens. Zelensky talked about this yesterday in his speech. We're not talking about for war refugees if we can, determine that these guys are legit, but we're talking about travel restrictions for the rest of other Europeans. And he said, there must be a guarantee that we're not going to get the wrong types, but visa restrictions, he ultimately concluded, for the Russian Federation are fair, and all defenders of European values should insist on them. What he's saying is, look, if they're going to invade another country, shouldn't let them travel elsewhere. And if Europe puts visa restrictions on Russia, that'll have a pretty significant impact, I think, as much as any other other economic sanctions have. Okay, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Reznikov, initiates an appeal to Ramstein. That's this Ramstein working group to delegate experts working on military justice and tribunals. And so what he's trying to do is get an international group to work on combating war crimes now. Because remember, there's a military war, there's a political war, there's an economic war, there's a propaganda war. And if you can create a war crimes court that's starting to operate during the war, that's another powerful plank in your platform. And I think he's right to be working on that. They're going to need to do it at least after the war, but if they can start working on that now, that'll be pretty powerful. Of course, Russia's going to have a hard time recognizing the authority of whatever court. Ukraine is in default, according to Fitch. So earlier in the week, Ukraine's overseas creditors backed the country's request for a 2-year freeze, but the global ratings agency saw this as being distressed, and so Ukraine's currency ratings have gone down into restricted default. So they were already going, dropping like a rock since this began, and they weren't all that high to begin with, but the invasion has really hurt them. On the plus side, you see 4 more Ukrainian grain ships have left Ukraine, and that's great. All the grain that they can get out of the country, the better for Ukraine, the better for the global food crisis that was brewing. So that's a good sign. Okay, let's turn our attention to like the big event from the week. On August 9th, explosions occurred in a Russian-operated Sky military airfield in western Crimea. This was a big thing. I talked about it a couple days ago. At least 5 Su Su-24 Fencer fighter bombers and 3 Su-30 Flanker H multi-role jets were almost certainly destroyed. I keep reading about 9, but the Ministry of Defense is saying at least 8 combat jets represents a minor portion of the overall fleet. However, it was primarily used as a base for the aircraft of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet, and the fleet's naval aviation capability is now significantly degraded. Now, this is from the UK Ministry of Defense. They put out an intelligence update every day. But it's more than this. Okay, so here's Radio Free Europe talking about like what actually happened. Was it a missiles? Was it shipborne? Was it HIMARS? Was it armed drones, special forces, sabotage? We don't know, but it doesn't matter because these 9 they destroyed at least 9. Remember, I keep saying 9. The UK identified at least 8, but nonetheless, they destroyed about that many aircraft. But the real issue is psychological. Now, Crimea has always been thought of as safe. Russia has denied an attack even occurred. That an attack even occurred. They still haven't admitted it yet because they lie, and that's what's happening here. Saying fire safety violations caused ammunition to explode, a version that has been rejected abroad. And any independent outside of outside of Russia's official line, any independent journalist in Europe is saying that's not what's going on. Okay, it's bad news for Russia, regardless of who struck and how they did it, because it expands a dangerous front in the war, says Robert Pearson at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Now, think about this. If you're Russia, you always thought that Crimea was safe. They can't attack Crimea. They don't have the weapons to get to Crimea. But now if you have to back Crimea out, you're about to fight in Kherson, and you have to back Crimea out, this could make a significant difference in Ukraine's effort to retake Kherson. Right? It could be logistical havoc for Russia in Crimea. Okay? It goes on. The Russians are rushing everybody into Kherson to defend it against possible Ukrainian offensive, so opening up another front in Crimea makes perfect military sense, and it's long overdue, Glenn Howard, a military analyst of the Jamestown Federation, said. This places the Russians in a real quandary, says Mick Ryan, a retired major general. The Ukrainians clearly now hold large parts of Crimea at risk. Right? They weren't at risk before. They never had to think about that. But think about what's there. It's not just air bases. It's the Black Sea Fleet. It's fuel, munition, repair yards, infrastructure. It's all now vulnerable. So this really was a powerful thing when they could hit, because they didn't think, how can you hit here from over here? You don't have the weapons. But apparently they did, and they made it work. And Ryan called it a morale disaster for Russia, making the military look incompetent at defending bases. And he even said in the article that it was a bigger morale blow than the Moskva, which was really, that's incredible. Okay, let's keep moving. Russia-Ukraine war, Moscow warns U.S. over diplomatic point of no return. So let's look at now we looked at the military and we looked at some economics, and so now we're looking at the political war here. And so as we look at the political war, let's couple that with the propaganda war as well, because we're going to look at it from RT. Moscow reveals a point of no return. By the way, if you haven't read Russia Today, read Russia Today. Watch it on here, Russia Today live. You can also see it on Rumble if you can't make it work on your website. Like it won't work on my work website because it's banned in many places. Okay, if the U.S. designates Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, it would be a point of no return in relations between the two countries. Okay, said by whom? In an interview, the head of the ministry's North American department, Alexander Darchev. I don't know who he is, but he's in charge of that department. Its implementation would mean that Washington has crossed the point of no return. The American side has been warned about it. Now, that's interesting. Why are they warning them? Why are they warning the Americans? You better not call us a terrorist nation, or label us a state sponsor of terrorism. They don't want that. That's really interesting. Why don't they want that? What happens? Well, the U.S. Senate unanimously approved a non-binding resolution calling on the Secretary of State. Only the Secretary of State can actually designate, and the Senate overwhelmingly, like it was 97 to nothing or something. A couple people, no, actually, it wasn't unanimous. It was I think it was 97 to 1, and Rand Paul and somebody else just said present. But I mean, that's pretty powerful when you have that kind of. Yeah. Okay. So the lawmakers say that putting Russia on the same list as Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Syria Well, that's kind of how they're acting. So that's probably where they belong. But that would enable the U.S. to further increase pressure on Moscow by extending sanctions beyond specific sectors of the economy. That's why they don't want it. Now, the State Department has so far been reluctant to fulfill the request. I'm not sure if they're reluctant or if it just takes time, but it has been a couple weeks since the Senate passed this, and so we're waiting on that. Okay, so that's what's going on politically. Different paper entirely. This is the Morning Star for Peace and Socialism. Never heard of it before. The article was terrible, but we're in the propaganda phase of this now. Last, as in all wars, truth is the first casualty. That's very often true. And when you read RT and the official state, Russian state version of things, you know that that's true. The mainstream media puts forward NATO's version of events. Well, that's because the other version is largely mythical, while dissenting voices of the peace movement or some academics are barely heard. Before the war, Ukraine was portrayed as the most corrupt country in Europe. Today, the country is the epitome of liberal ideals. Well, okay, so let's address that, because this is important to understand. Ukraine has historically been somewhat corrupt. This is Transparency International. Okay, it's inherited a legacy of corruption from the Soviet days. Its ranking was 122nd out of 180. Okay, I talk about this in my book. There's no getting around this. So that means that they have a score of about 32%. So they're pretty corrupt. Russia's in the neighborhood. Russia's a little bit better on corruption. It's in the same neighborhood though, as it's not a remarkable difference. So that, it's just part of the neighborhood, right? But Ukraine is heading headlong into the European Union, and they're making changes. Like Zelensky was brought to power saying he was going to make changes, and he made fewer changes than I think he wanted to or was able to in retrospect. But we're not talking about corruption right now. This is talking about, but before the war, Ukraine was portrayed as corrupt. Today, it's the epitome of liberal ideas. It's not the epitome of liberal ideas, but they are clearly the victim being victimized by an aggressor. And in the meantime, they're actually moving toward less corruption because of all the EU regulations they're trying to conform to right now, and as they try to merge into EU and into NATO. So they're moving headlong the right direction, but they're clearly the victim. And I will not say that, well, Russia was victimized too. No, Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine is the victim. It's pretty clear. Okay, so at any rate, this is more the health of what's going on here in the situation. Last thing, and I want to end here on a 10-point scale. This is Interfax Ukraine. So it's going to have a pro-Ukraine kind of view, and I'm fine with that. I try to tell you what my sources are. So there, whether it's Interfax or Radio Free Europe or Newsweek or The Guardian or RT, you saw all of those today. On a 10-point scale, effectiveness of Ukraine's armed forces estimated at 12 points, says the Pentagon. That's pretty awesome. So here's the actual quote. I lifted it and then did a Google search. Here's the Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense, saying this about Ukraine. Here we go. Let's get that down to the bottom. The official said, on a scale of 0 to 10, the effectiveness of Ukraine's armed forces would be a 12. Just based on how impressively they've been to us in so many different ways. They have found ways to do things that we might not have thought were even possible, like striking the air base in Crimea. So what's the report card, the score, the health score of Ukraine today? I think it's just impressive that you're here after 170 or so days. 170 days. Like, roll back the clock on February 24th when we all watched Russian tanks rolling across the border. We're like, uh-oh, wow, this isn't going to go good, right? And now you're looking at 170 days and you're thinking, let's see, I think you can do it. So just that you're here is amazing enough. But I think they're pretty healthy. Yes, the economy's suffering. Yes, things have been damaged. Yes, people have died. Yes, Fitch just brought down your ratings, but your corn's getting out, and things are working better than you thought. You're still able to hold the fight. And the U.S. government just said they just gave you a 12 out of 10. 12 on a 10-point scale in how you're fighting off your adversary. So good on you, Ukraine. I think, This time next month, I think we'll have even better things to report. Thank you for your time. If you've listened so far, please consider subscribing. And I'd appreciate it if you'd also write me a comment. Tell me how we're doing. Leave a like, those kind of things. Thank you, and I'll be back tomorrow.